and welcome to The Context USA. I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington.
And I'm Anita McVeigh in London. And tonight we're looking at the takeaways from President Trump's State of the Union address.
Our country is winning again. In fact, we're winning so much that we really don't know what to do about it. People are asking me, please, 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 Mr. President, we're winning too much. They're blocking the removal of these people out of our country, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
From the Republicans and Republican voters, many of them have said that this is a confident vision of America. Donald Trump was energized as he lay out his vision.
What he did say was mostly a political campaign rally, a demonstrably divisive speech that tried to focus on a few hot-button issues that harken back to his campaign.
We will speak about those issues with our panel tonight. Doug Heye, former communications director for the Republican National Committee, and Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and author of the briefing book on Substack. Welcome to you both. Welcome to The Context USA. We spend the next hour discussing the main issues coming out from here in Washington. And we'll start tonight with President Trump's State of the Union address, in which he declared that the U.S. is, quote, bigger, better, richer, and stronger than ever before.
The president delivered a combative speech, the longest ever, at nearly 2 hours, which was punctuated by repeated standing ovations from Republicans. President Trump hailed what he called an American turnaround for the ages.
The address was, in part, a pitch to American voters ahead of the key midterm elections later this year, but also a celebration of what the president sees as his achievements. He said America is winning again with rising incomes and a growing stock market, and he blamed the country's affordability crisis on the previous administration and Democrats.
He pledged to push ahead with his tariffs and double down on immigration. But there was little that addressed his low standing in the opinion polls, with those key congressional elections just a few months away. Let's listen to some of what the president had to say.
Our nation is back, bigger, better, richer, and stronger than ever before. You've seen nothing yet. We're going to do better and better and better. This is the golden age of America. After just 1 year, I can say with dignity and pride that we have achieved a transformation like no one has ever seen before, and a turnaround for the ages. It is indeed.
Well, after a rousing start, it didn't take the president long to get onto the more controversial policies.
And President Trump used the address to defend his immigration tactics and global tariffs. Take a listen.
After 4 years, in which millions and millions of illegal aliens poured across our borders, totally unvetted and unchecked, we now have the strongest and most secure border in American history by far. So despite the disappointing ruling, these powerful, country-saving, it's saving our country, the kind of money we're taking in, peace-protecting. Many of the wars I settled was because of the threat of tariffs. I wouldn't have been able to settle them without. Will remain in place under fully approved and tested alternative legal statutes.
Let's bring in our panel, Doug Heye and Joel Rubin, to get their take. Gentlemen, it is good to see you both the day after the State of the Union. The applause has settled, and now we can kind of really dig into some of the points that President Trump made. So, Doug, I'll start with you. Many Republicans, perhaps unsurprisingly, praising President Trump, saying this was exactly the speech he needed to deliver, especially to voters. Do you agree?
No, because I'm hearing mixed signals from Republicans on Capitol Hill. I'm hearing a lot of that publicly. Privately, I'm hearing some bewilderment that he didn't talk more about the economy and the real economic pain that voters feel. He blamed, obviously, a lot of things on Joe Biden. I understand that. Joe Biden blamed a lot of things on Donald Trump. And, every 4 or 8 years in our history, it seems that that's what happens. But Trump, I think, missed a moment here to demonstrate to voters he understands exactly what's going on, the pain that they feel, the uncertainty that they feel, and that he has plans to fix it. And the good news for politicians is if you tell voters you understand what the problem is, they give you some latitude with what you might suggest as the possible solutions. They want to know that you get it. And so I think Trump missed a moment here to do that. Too many voters, when he said we are, richer than we've ever been before, or hotter than we've ever been before, there are too many voters throughout this country who every time they go to the grocery store don't feel that they are richer than they've ever been before.
Just before I bring Joel in, Doug, why do you think he missed the moment?
Look, Donald Trump always promotes big and beautiful, right? I'm old enough to remember legislation on Capitol Hill called Obamacare that I fought against. And one of the reasons that Republicans fought against it was too big. It was too many pages. Now that's big and that's beautiful. So Trump is a showman, a promoter. He obviously doesn't want to admit that voters are feeling pain because that may, boomerang on him. The reality is it's still there for voters. And as he travels the country, as J.D. Vance, I know, is in Wisconsin today, I think they're going to hear and see more of that. And that's certainly what they're hearing from congressional Republicans, especially those who are in the tight races coming up in these primaries that are approaching or even happening now, and then moving towards November.
And Joel, let's get your initial thoughts on that speech.
Yeah, Anisha, look, those members of Congress who are in competitive districts today must be very nervous because nothing last night gave a direction from this president to how he wants the country to go that will help these candidates win. To be honest, it spoke just to the base. His approval rating is 36%. I agree with Doug that he missed the moment. He spoke more in terms of quantity of minutes about Venezuela than he did about the American economy. And why wouldn't he, right? Like only days ago, the core of his economic agenda, tariffs, was ruled illegal by a Supreme Court that he picked largely. So, he didn't have a great story. So now maybe he's trying to manifest and tell people how great things are when their lived experience is the opposite. And I think we see it in the results. Over the last year, 90% of the key races across the country have been won by Democrats. Another one last night where a Democrat in Pennsylvania, a key swing state at the state level, won by outperforming Kamala Harris by 30 points. So Democrats are energized, independents are not happy, and Republicans are shrinking in terms of their impact on the electorate.
Joel, I know we're going to talk more about the Democrats in just a moment, but to pick up on your point on Democrats being energized, the polling doesn't seem to indicate that voters are energized about the Democrats.
Right. Yeah. No, it is a paradox, isn't it, Sumi? Look, I mean, frankly, Americans across the board, with good reason, are very frustrated and annoyed, disappointed with both political parties. But when they look at what the Democrats are offering and talking about in race by race, Democrats do well. It's when they say all politics is local. So I hate the Democrats nationally, but I like my local elected. And so we saw last night the Democratic respondent to the president was Abigail Spanberger, who won a convincing victory in Virginia by like 15 points to become the governor. And so she's very popular. They flipped the state houses there in Virginia now where she can pass legislation. And I think that's what we're going to see across the country at the local level.
So, Doug, we've talked a little bit, haven't we, about the economy and President Trump doubling down on the issue of tariffs, which he clearly holds very dear. I just want to touch in this segment as well on what he said on immigration. Is that largely still a very partisan split? He is supported by Republicans on that, or are you seeing increasing numbers of Republicans questioning how he handles this issue?
Well, it really goes both ways. Donald Trump said it a couple weeks ago. He said, I've solved the problem at the border, so you never talk about it anymore. And he was right. When you solve a problem, you then tend to not focus on the problem because the problem's been solved. So we're not seeing, as he mentioned last night, we're not really seeing anybody come up through the southern border. We have seen that fentanyl going through the border has been stopped almost completely. And that's obviously very good news. But voters sort of think about what is happening lately, not what happened a year ago or 9 months ago. And so that's where it really becomes a mixed message for the president, because he had success on the border. And then what voters see and what Republican members of Congress see as well in Minneapolis, most specifically, they struggle with how to talk about it, but they certainly don't like what they're seeing.
Well, let's bring in another aspect of the State of the Union now, because a number of Democrats didn't attend the address on Tuesday night, choosing instead to attend rival rallies in protest at President Trump's policies. Those that did attend spent the first hour of the speech sitting in silence.
But once the president mentioned immigration, things changed. Democratic Congresswomen Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib repeatedly shouted at President Trump, resulting in a back and forth. Take a look.
They're blocking the removal of these people out of our country, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
And I should mention that the president took to Truth Social today and lashed out both at Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, saying they should go back where they came from, which is a comment that we've heard the president make in the past towards these congresswomen. Joel, what did you make of how they chose to show resistance and the comments we've seen again from President Trump today?
Yeah, well, Sumi, that's a slur to tell an American citizen, a sitting member of Congress, to go back where you came from. It's clearly done because these are female members of Congress, women of color. They're the first Muslims elected to the U.S. Congress as well, outside of Keith Ellison, that is, I should say earlier, but first Muslim women. And, it is the strength of Donald Trump to pick these fights. I'll give him credit. He is sticking his playbook, and he wants to provoke, and he got a reaction. And I do wish, and I'll say this to my side, I do wish the Democrats had shown up last night. I don't like the idea of boycotting these speeches. I think we can be better than that. He is the duly elected president. He won the popular vote. We can criticize and critique, as we should, but I don't think we should be boycotting any of these speeches. It's bad for our democracy, and we should let the American people see what he did and how he treated these women. And I don't think the American people like to see that kind of harsh and divisive rhetoric from their president from such a stage.
Doug, Joel says, boycotting a speech such as this is bad for democracy. But I want to get your perspective on the various ways in which Democrats showed up, whether they were in the chamber or not. Obviously, there were alternative events, alternative State of the Union addresses and events going on. That is part of democracy, isn't it?
Well, sure. What you have with the State of the Union is a very unique thing. And I actually question now, will we have a State of the Union next year if Democrats take the House back like we saw this year or in previous years? There's no requirement for the President of the United States to give a speech in the House of Representatives chamber. It used to be in writing for well over 100 years. So, we always see the Speaker introduce the President. Is a Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, if Democrats win back the House, going to gavel down the House and introduce Donald Trump to a Democratic majority in the House? I don't think we know yet. And part of that is also, what we saw last night and what we've seen in previous nights. And I always caution politicians who are eager to show how much they want to fight. And maybe they don't have a strategy to land a punch or to knock your opponent down. So what I saw last night with the two members of Congress, they played directly into Donald Trump's hand. They gave him the fight that Donald Trump wanted. That also happened just a few years ago with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert when they gave Joe Biden the fight that he wanted. When Joe Wilson in 2009 yelled, "You lie," at President Barack Obama, that helped Barack Obama. Sometimes I wish House members might think some of this stuff through a little bit more before they start yelling.
So, Joel, what strategy does work for the Democrats? Obviously, last year they were criticized for holding up those paddles with slogans on them. This year there were these alternative events. Some of them were not that well attended. Are they able to gain traction with their messaging?
Yeah, we are, because look at the vote totals over the past year. That's how you win ultimately over time, is the right policies, the right message, and the right messengers, and getting that out across the country and pointing out the gaps. Why is President Trump not speaking about affordability and in a way sneering at the concept even? Those are the arguments that need to be made. I think that what we saw last night was a lot of Democrats getting out across the internet and through live streams, and that's all very important and part of it. I wish we hadn't had the cell phone of not showing up, but winning at the local level and making the case, that's what has to be done. That's what's being done by Democrats across the country.
OK, Doug and Joel will have more from that State of the Union address about foreign policy after the break. But first, a short break around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News. Welcome back to The Context USA, where we're discussing President Trump's State of the Nation address. And as is typical with these congressional addresses, no matter who the president is, foreign policy tended to take a back seat.
But despite the massive buildup of American forces near Iran, President Trump did little to make the case to the American public that a sustained U.S. military action was necessary. Take a listen to what he had to say about Iran.
After Midnight Hammer, they were warned to make no future attempts to rebuild their weapons program, and in particular, nuclear weapons. Yet they continue. They're starting it all over. We wiped it out, and they want to start all over again. And are at this moment, again, pursuing their sinister ambitions. We are in negotiations with them. They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon.
Let's bring in our panel on this. And Joel, given the tensions between the U.S. and Iran right now and that military buildup in the region, are you surprised we didn't hear more from the president on this?
You know, Sumi, I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. I do think the president needs to speak directly to the American people, and I think he can make the case. He can argue as to why it is necessary for the United States to be telling the Iranian regime, hey, don't slaughter your own people by the tens of thousands, which is why the forces went out there to begin with. Explain what the danger is of a renewed Iranian nuclear program and the threats to the region, and then come to Congress and ask for congressional authorization. I think that's a needed part of legitimizing this policy that he's taking us on, but we just don't know. And so it's another missed opportunity. If we, the United States, begin to attack Iran and do not have congressional support for it, and the American people aren't bought into it, it's going to fall flat very quickly, especially if American service members get killed. And I think for the president, that hurts his overall policy. I wish he had taken the opportunity with that platform and in front of Congress. He just didn't. And it may mean that he's really not confident in what he's doing towards Iran.
And Doug, you know, it may well be the case that the president hasn't obviously firmly decided what he does want to do with Iran. We've heard from him and then again from Vice President Vance today that he still prefers a diplomatic solution. But would you like to see him talking to Congress more as well, as Joel was suggesting, about this?
You know, it's probably the one issue I had the most questions on about what administration policy has been in just the past few weeks and is going to be in the coming days and weeks, and what I wanted to hear more from the president on. And look, these are very difficult things. I don't think anybody, underestimates the difficulty that we face here diplomatically and potentially militarily. And so, ultimately, Donald Trump always views himself as the art of the deal, the great deal maker. I'd argue that if he cut the same deal that the Biden administration, the Obama administration did, he would be fully praising that. But what is going to be the cost of any deal to get the Iranians to say that one sentence that Trump correctly says they don't want to say? That ultimately may not be a good deal. And so I think it's why you have a lot of questions, not necessarily bad questions per se, but a lot of questions from Republicans and Democrats about where the administration is and wants to go.
Joel, I want to ask you about those questions from Democrats. You know, we saw the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, brief the Gang of Eight, so the 8 members of Congress who are briefed on classified information. And when they came out, the Democrats, they didn't overtly call for a war powers resolution from Congress, that they be asked about the power to strike Iran. So why do you think that is, and where do you think Democrats stand on any sort of military engagement with Iran?
Yeah, you know, Sumi, it's a very complex issue for Democrats, and I've worked on this for a number of years, including in the Obama administration. There still isn't, to Doug's point, a lot of burnt anger and hostility towards Donald Trump's Iran policy, because there was a sense that President Obama had gotten it right, got a nuclear deal that hemmed in Iran's nuclear program without starting a war. And so now this slide into this uncertain territory that we're in right now, that was predicted by President Obama. This was all preventable. So Democrats are frustrated in a way. I think they want the president to own this. Now they're willing to have a discussion in Congress, and in these classified briefings, they're getting a little more detail. But the sad truth is classified briefings don't really give that much more detail than what we know out here in the public. And the question is are there real war plans? And I think for Democrats, the key questions that they want to have answers to are, what's the day after plan? How do you stabilize the country if you attack it? Who takes leadership if you knock out the Ayatollah, the supreme leader? What do we do about the loose nuclear material? What do we do about the ballistic missiles? How do you protect Israel? All of these crucial political military questions that do need to be answered ahead of time, that the National Security Council hopefully is developing the answers, but members of Congress need those too.
Yeah, certainly President Trump, his administration have remained relatively vague on that, perhaps strategically. Yep. But we want to talk to you all about another foreign policy subject involving President Trump, the issue of the Chagos Islands. The UK government says there's no pause in a deal to transfer control to Mauritius, a plan that President Trump has criticized.
Earlier, a foreign minister here said it was on hold to allow for further discussions with the United States. But the UK government said the minister misspoke and that there is no delay.
Under the terms of the agreement, the UK would hand sovereignty of the islands in the Indian Ocean to Mauritius, while keeping a joint UK-US military base on the largest island, the Diego Garcia.
President Trump has said the base could be needed to launch attacks against Iran. He has flip-flopped on his approach to the plan, but has now said the UK would be making a big mistake. Well, let's return to Doug and to Joel. Joel, this has some parallels with Greenland, doesn't it? Because there already exists a plan which allows the US and the UK to continue to use that joint military base. I wonder what your thoughts are on how the government should navigate the discussions. We're talking here about how they ratify this agreement with Mauritius, how the UK should approach that when President Trump is changing his mind.
Yeah, doesn't it, though? Islands and bases and military bases, right? There's a direct link between the two. And I frankly think that this is a sovereign decision for the UK, and the UK should do what's in its best historic interest in terms of the Chagos Islands. And it decided to turn them over, so do that. That does not undermine our ability to have our base there, as you just described. And so for President Trump, this is stepping back. This goes to his worldview, in particular with Greenland, which is that somehow one can't have a secure base in a foreign land unless that land is owned by the United States, which is counter to history. We have bases all around the world, in countries all around the world, where they allow us to operate. We have agreements, bilateral agreements, status of forces agreements, overflight agreements, you name it. And so I think it's the president just trying to sort of transpose his worldview of control that land onto the British, and it's unnecessary from a military perspective.
Doug, what do you think is behind this? Why do you think we've seen the president, at least on social media, fixated on this issue?
Look, bases and land are important to Donald Trump. We sometimes forget, because we know him as this massive television personality and so forth. He is a real estate person. He cares about land and he cares about buildings. He wants to expand his holdings of land and buildings. Foreign bases, perfect way for him to try and do that. So it's not terribly surprising that he would use this tack, as we've seen him do in other theaters as well.
Yeah, and Doug, on that point that I raised with Joel, I mean, how do you think, from the UK's perspective, it deals with the president, given that he has been flip-flopping on this?
Look, obviously the UK should do what is in its best strategic imperative, but also understanding, as I know the government does, because they've already gone through 4 years of this, there is a special kind of hand-holding that you need to do with Donald Trump and his administration. So they're going to have to work the relationship on this a little harder than they might otherwise have to.
Joel, we just have about 30 seconds, but do these types of disagreements, you think, get in the way of alliances? Until now, President Trump has had warm words about the British Prime Minister, about his relationship with the UK.
Yeah, Sumi certainly has. Calls him his friend. These are moments that need to be taken seriously. I agree with Doug. Clearly, the president communicated a displeasure. It would be embarrassing to him, quite frankly, if our closest ally, the UK, were to turn over a territory and still maintain a base, right? It's the counter argument to his whole Greenland strategy, but it would be the right call. And so I think they're going to have to try to figure out how to calm his nerves and make sure that he understands it's not an affront to Donald Trump, that it's in the UK's best interests.
OK, much more conversation to come with Joel and Doug, so do stay with us here on The Context USA on BBC News.
Hello. There have been some reports of severe flooding in parts of southern Bali over the last day or so. Certainly some big thunderclouds working in here, and there will be some further very heavy thundery showers expected over the next few days. Not the only place that will see some rain. We've also got a trough bringing widespread heavy downpours into parts of southern Vietnam as we go through Thursday, and it's also looking pretty wet for southern and eastern parts of mainland China. We'll eventually see some of that rain working into Taiwan, and some rain also affecting parts of Japan as well. Heading further southwestwards, we're looking at some heavy showers into parts of Malaysia and Singapore. There'll be some warm sunshine, of course, between these downpours. Top temperatures into the low 30s here. Now, over the next few days, it's mostly dry for the Philippines. Sunshine for Manila, highs of 32 to 33 degrees Celsius over the next few days. Now, the weather looks pretty unsettled for Australia. Thunderstorms are going to be widespread for central and eastern areas. Some largely dry weather, though, for Western Australia and Tasmania, where we've got an area of high pressure with us at the moment. For New Zealand, mixed fortunes, really. We have a band of rain moving into central areas, pushing its way northwards through Friday. The weather becomes drier for much of the South Island with some pleasant spells of sunshine. Here's your outlook over the next few days. A few thunderstorms this weekend for Auckland. Clearing next week. Should be drier with some sunshine by Monday.
Yellow train! Now, we haven't staged this. This is actually just pulled into the station, and these are actually very rare, these yellow Shinkansens. It's quite a privilege to see them.
That is really nice. It's so smooth.
You forgot to do something. Hazelnut crumbs.
I have 6 to 10 shots underneath me right now.
Inspiring travel on the BBC.
We live in a time of disinformation, making it more important than ever to get to the heart of events, from the shifting political landscape.
This administration is going to use actual soldiers much more liberally than perhaps they had in the past.
To the conflicts reshaping our world.
This war has already scarred the Russian society.
Join me, John Simpson, and my BBC colleagues on Unspun World. Watch on BBC News.
The fearsome display of cartel violence this week has shaken Mexicans who are trying to get back to normal. But what does the killing of El Mencho mean for Mexico? Join me, Will Grant, on BBC News.
I'm on a Turkish adventure, combining my love of food with history. And in the country's southeast, the dishes echo the old spice routes, and the stories reach back to the dawn of civilization. Join me, Julie Lynn, for World's Ultimate Adventures on BBC News.
How is the new Netflix documentary about Lucy Letby being received? And why does this case continue to attract audiences around the world? Some say the true crime boom raises difficult ethical questions, and we'll hear from journalists and researchers covering the story. It's all on the Media Show on BBC News.
Here at BBC Verify, we use forensic investigative techniques and tools to fact-check stories, verify information and counter disinformation. Using data analysis and the latest technology, our journalists examine the evidence and get to the facts. Watch our BBC Verify reports on the BBC News channel or go online to find out more.
Hello and welcome back to The Context USA. I'm Anita McVeigh in London.
And I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington. A brewing battle between one of the U.S.'s leading AI companies and the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. That's coming up a little later.
Before that, let's bring you a developing story from the last hour and a half or so, because officials in Cuba say they have shot and killed 4 people on a U.S. registered vessel in Cuban territorial waters. A statement from Cuba's Interior Ministry says the Florida registered boat approached Cuba and a unit from Cuba's border guard attempted to intercept it.
The statement claims that when Cuban forces approached the boat, those on board opened fire on the Cuban security forces. Cuba says its officers returned fire, resulting in 4 of what it called the aggressors on the boat being killed and 6 injured. Let's bring in our senior North America reporter, Bernd de Busman, on this story. Great to see you. And of course, this is a developing story, Bernd. But what do we know at this point?
Well, we don't know much more than what you just said, that this vessel was detected in Cuban waters, and then when the Cuban Interior Ministry's border guard attempted to investigate, they claimed they were shot at and returned fire, killing 4 and wounding 6. Now, we're starting to see a lot of reaction from, particularly from Cuban American politicians. Of course, South Florida is home to a very large Cuban expatriate population. And in the last half hour or so, Florida's Attorney General said he directed law enforcement to begin an investigation into that. What we don't know yet is who exactly is on the boat or what they were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. We should say that this comes at a tense time between the U.S. and Cuba, Bernd. Bring us up to date on where things stand right now between this administration and Cuba.
Well, tensions have been rising in recent months, particularly since January when U.S. forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The Trump administration has also taken steps to kind of put a chokehold on fuel supplies to Cuba, which has worsened an already existing fuel crisis there. And it should be noted that this incident also comes just a day after Cuban Americans commemorated the 30-year anniversary of a 1996 incident in which 4 Cuban expatriates from Florida were shot down on a plane while they were attempting to distribute leaflets over Cuba. So it's a particularly sensitive time for the Cuban American population in Florida. And the Cuban government to this day routinely says it detects vessels from Florida in its waters that they suspect are removing family members from Cuba. So it's a very, very touchy situation and a very, very touchy time for Cuba.
And Bear, just remind us what President Trump himself has said about Cuba, about U.S. relations with Cuba in recent months.
Well, particularly after the capture of Maduro in Venezuela, the president has repeatedly said that he thinks that the Cuban regime will fall. He hasn't given much more detail than that, other than to say that he thinks the Cuban regime will fall and that he's talking to people about what that might look like. It's still unclear how he thinks the Cuban regime will fall, who he thinks might run Cuba in the aftermath, but he's certainly something of a hawk on Cuba, as is his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio.
Okay, Bernd de Busman, thank you so much for that update.
And still with us, our panel, Doug Heye, former communications director of the Republican National Committee, and Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Doug, obviously there's a lot that we don't know about this evolving situation involving the speedboat, but clearly it comes as part of a picture, a very difficult context in terms of the relationship between the US and Cuba, as we were just hearing from Bernd, although we did hear today, for example, that the government, the Trump administration, has authorized that Venezuelan companies can start selling oil to Cuba again, which has been suffering from a severe fuel shortage. Just give us your thoughts on the bigger picture, as well as any comments you have on this incident involving the speedboat.
Sure. Obviously, we need to know a lot more of what the details are on the incident. I went to Havana 2 years ago, and I was struck with what I saw about how it was an economy pretty much in free fall. And obviously, it has fallen a lot further since then. It's a joyous, wonderful place to visit, but also there's a lot of sadness there because of the lack of freedom, because of the lack of economic development. And it struck me as very ripe for an opportunity there, especially if America reelected somebody as president who, doesn't necessarily think necessarily about what other countries might come first. And if they has a history of gambling, and we've seen comments that Trump has made in the past on that, very easy to see Trump leaning forward on this. But again, I don't want to say too much more. I would say, just as a reassurance to our friends in the British audience, James Hooley is the ambassador to Cuba from the United Kingdom, one of the most serious and capable diplomats I've had the good fortune of knowing, worked for multiple U.S. ambassadors here, UK ambassadors to the U.S. here in Washington, a really good asset for His Majesty's government.
Joel, coming to you on this, obviously very little that we know about the situation at the moment, who was on the boat, but just in the wider context of U.S. relations with Cuba, I'm curious to hear your take, obviously working in the Obama administration, where we saw a warming of that relationship with Cuba, and now President Trump using that very tough language, saying, as we heard from Barron, that he thinks Cuba, its government, will fall.
Yeah, Sumi, look, Cuba policy right now is in a very harsh place here in Washington. Without a doubt, this is the most aggressive positioning of the United States towards Cuba in decades. And, frankly, in international affairs, incidents happen, right? Things happen, unpredictable dynamics occur all the time. The question now is, as a White House, how is the president going to respond? Is he going to be calculated and calm and get his leaders, his advisors together to figure out what exactly happened in Cuba and what do we need to know in order to protect our craft if it's an American flagged vessel, as well as to not let this escalate? Or is he going to use it as a potential pivot point based on or to take advantage of this moment and build upon the harsh policy that we have to condemn the Cuban government for shooting at a vessel, for killing people. And so right now we're in this sort of unknown territory about Cuba. But the dynamic of this president is to be harsh first. And we have seen that across the Caribbean. We've seen that language towards Cuba. So I would not be at all surprised if he chooses that path rather than a calm, measured one to try to understand what exactly took place.
Yeah, still no comment to this point from the White House, so we're waiting to hear what U.S. officials are saying about this, and we'll update you, our viewers, of course, when we hear anything. But let's move on now to some growing calls on both sides of the aisle for Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez to resign. Gonzalez is facing allegations that he had an affair with a member of his staff who later died by suicide. Text messages between the Texas congressman and Regina Santos Aviles have come to light, appearing to show Gonzalez asking his former aide for a sexy picture. In one message, she responded saying he was going too far.
Santos Aviles died in September last year after setting herself on fire. She was married and had an 8-year-old son. Gonzalez has in the past denied having an affair with a member of staff, but hasn't commented directly on the text messages released.
Still, some of his Republican colleagues in Congress, including Nancy Mace and Tim Burchett, are calling for him to step down. But Representative Gonzalez has remained defiant, saying on Tuesday he won't step down because he works, quote, every day for the people of Texas. Now, Speaker Mike Johnson, who has a razor-thin majority in the House of Representatives, had this to say to our partner CBS News on Tuesday.
Of course, he's an incumbent. We made an endorsement of Tony Gonzalez back in the fall, before any of this came up. The allegations are, it's detestable what is being alleged. my understanding is he's denied a lot of this, and we're trying to sort it out. Now, it has been reported that the Office of Congressional Conduct is investigating this and has been for some time. And what we do here is we allow all the facts to play out. That's what we must do.
Well, with us still are Doug Heye and Joel Rubin. Joel, do you think at a minimum that Mr. Gonzalez should be willing to answer questions about this?
Well, wow, Speaker Johnson is very generous with Mr. Gonzalez, isn't he? Look, answer questions all you want. You're not entitled to a seat in Congress. Seats in Congress are vacated all the time. This is an individual who has to answer and doesn't want to answer. And I think that's the real problem here, is that we see a dynamic from the leadership, as just described, to try to move this to the side, analogous to the Epstein files, and not wanting the bad news out about harsh and frankly vile activities by the members. I'm proud of Nancy Mace and others for speaking truth to power. Tony Gonzalez should be out of Congress and deal with this in a private matter, in a private setting.
Doug, I'll just repeat again that Tony Gonzalez hasn't answered to the specific text messages that were released, but in the past had denied having this affair. That being said, how do you think the Speaker should be handling this?
Well, look, he's obviously operating in a political world that is very, very difficult with a razor slim majority. What I'd say is he's been consistent with how he views this and George Santos. Let the system go through its process and let the process play out. The difference is, for George Santos, he was accused of a crime. So that system was ultimately going to court and going through that process, and then being expelled somewhere along that way. Gonzalez has not been accused of a crime. What we know is he is very clearly engaged in an improper relationship, or an attempted improper relationship, with somebody who worked directly for him, and ultimately somebody who not only took their life, but took their life in a way that is just unimaginable. And so how he can justify it to himself, I think, is a very difficult thing. But here's the reality. No, unless the House votes him out, which takes a supermajority to do so, the Speaker of the House or no one else can do so. And so even if he loses his primary, he can stay in office until January 3rd of next year.
Right. That's an important point. OK. Doug and Joel, we're going to be back with you in just a moment around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News.
Get on the floor! This had the potential, had they been successful, to be the most deadly terrorist attack in UK history.
We first of all will need 4 automatic guns. Every piece will have to have 200 bullets.
They planned to kill and injure hundreds of Jews living in Britain.
In the right environment, tens if not hundreds of people could have been hurt or killed.
For those who would have been in the firing line, it was a chilling close call.
It's a realisation that vile Jew hatred and violence against Jewish people is not a relic from the past.
They were driven by extreme Islamist ideology.
Are you supposed to revise this?
Do you want to answer? Yes.
You are?
Yes.
But unknown to the plotters, one of their number was not what he seemed. He was working for the police.
You're watching The Context USA. There is a brewing battle between one of the U.S.'s leading AI companies and the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. U.S. media have been reporting that Hegseth gave Anthropic until Friday to open the company's technology to unrestricted military use or risk losing its government contract. Now, Anthropic makes the chatbot Claude, and its CEO, Dario Amodei, has raised concerns about the use of AI for mass surveillance and fully autonomous armed drones.
The Pentagon has awarded defense contracts to Anthropic and other AI companies, including Google and OpenAI. But Anthropic was the first to get approval for use in classified military networks. And Hegseth says he wants to employ military AI systems that operate without what he has called ideological constraints that limit lawful military applications. Anthropic doesn't appear to be budging, but said we continued good faith conversations about our usage policy to ensure Anthropic can continue to support the government's national security mission in line with what our models can reliably and responsibly do. The clash with Hegseth has highlighted concerns again over the use and regulation of artificial intelligence, particularly when it comes to lethal force. Well, with me now is technology researcher and author Stephanie Hare, who co-presents the BBC programme AI Decoded. Stephanie, great to have you with us. So, Anthropic is taking a pretty hard line, isn't it, on this issue of domestic surveillance and AI weapons, and it's been labelled woke AI by Pete Hegseth, hasn't it, and other Trump administration officials. What exactly is woke AI?
I know, I love this label because it really shows where American politics are. We've heard so many people say that technology is neutral and that AI is neutral, it's just math, it's just zeros and ones. And then we have the US administration saying we don't want woke AI, which is an implicit acknowledgement that AI is not neutral. There are all sorts of values that are being encoded into this technology, how we design it, what guardrails we put in or decide we don't need. So, do you want to be allowing mass surveillance of US citizens? Seems like it should be pretty uncontroversial. The answer to that is we don't want it. But the DoD, now known as the Department of War, wants to be able to do it lawfully. So how would that work exactly? Anthropic is saying we don't trust politics on this. We want to encode it from the get-go in the model itself, that you could just never do that because they know that politics change.
Is Modi quite unusual in terms of these tech bosses, because he talks a lot, he talks big, doesn't he, about being more ethical?
He is different, I think, in this sense, and it's important for people to remember that the people who founded Anthropic actually had been at OpenAI, and they left because they felt that OpenAI was not living up to the safety first mission that that company had once had. So they're a sort of an outlier in claiming to put safety first.
Now, our US partners at CBS News reported that Pete Hegseth compared this to the government, for example, purchasing aircraft where the manufacturer doesn't control the military operation of that aircraft. Does he have a point when it comes to what he talks about is the lawful use of artificial intelligence technology in this particular case with Anthropic?
To make that kind of argument is to fundamentally misunderstand the power of AI. And this is kind of the debate that we've all been having now for years, right? As people have said, AI is so powerful that it poses an existential threat to humanity on the level of nuclear war or pandemics. That's why we've had all the AI safety summits. People have called for international treaties to regulate it, etc. So it's not like a fighter jet. It is something that could be taking over computers, that could be used to create bioweapons, could start a nuclear war by accident or deliberately, right? So it's really different. And that's why the people who are building it, who care about ethics, want to make sure it can't be abused.
So you're saying it's not a like-for-like comparison.
No.
Okay, Stephanie, you're going to stay with us, but we're going to bring our panel back in.
Yeah, I want to bring Joel and Doug in on this conversation. And Joel, if we look at the bottom line here, this is about whether AI should be used, as Anthropic has said, for mass surveillance and autonomous drone. What do you make of this controversy?
Yes, Sumi, it's a frightening discussion that is unfortunately only happening apparently in the office of the Secretary of Defense. And that's just not the way it should be done. I don't understand what Secretary Hegseth means by ideological concerns. Does he mean the rule of law? Does he mean American civil liberties? Does he mean the Constitution? These are real things that matter to real Americans who pay for these systems. And so it needs to go to Congress. There needs to be a vetting. There needs to be legislation. There needs to be rules of the road. It can't just be a unilateral decision. I fear that what the Secretary is doing is trying to take control of the technology for his own purposes, his own goals, without paying attention to any of the safeguards that Americans want.
We've heard the administration in the past also say, or those who promote the use of AI in many industries, that it is needed to loosen constraints in order to compete with China. But Doug, coming to you here, what do you make of this discussion?
Look, I think it highlights the difficulty that AI is bringing into how we talk about it in public life. If we're having this conversation 6 months ago, the outlook for AI, which is coming, and it's not even coming, is here, is a much more positive one. But what we've seen over the past month, and so many issues around AI, is people are getting more and more nervous about it. Not just whether or not it's going to cost jobs, it probably will, but what ultimately are the ethical uses, how pervasive will it be, and so many other ways of how this is going to go, not just in the next 5 years, but the next 5 months, how it's going to grow and progress that quickly in ways that we may not be able to fully predict at this point.
Stephanie, listening to what Doug and Joel are saying there, I mean, this issue of oversight and how you put a group of people together who can make thoughtful decisions on the use of AI technology, is that pretty different from what we're seeing here on the face of it with the Department of Defense, the Department of War, and Pete Hegseth?
Yes, of course, because what we're seeing right now is an absolute absence of any desire in the US government, Congress, etc., to regulate this technology, because the United States is scared that if it regulates this technology, countries such as China could move ahead. So what that means is it leaves it to the private companies to regulate themselves. But, you know, Anthropic is in a very difficult position because it's a private company, it wants to go public later this year. If it loses this contract and has the other consequences that Mr. Hegseth has threatened for it to have, that's going to hit its bottom line. So you have to look at incentives. Who has an incentive to keep humanity safe?
That is a very huge question to end the programme on. Stephanie Hare, thank you so much for your thoughts on that story today.
And that's all the time we have on that story. Doug and Joel, do stay with us. You're watching The Context USA on BBC News.